Hello, welcome to Introduction to Java Programming. In this session, we will discuss about user-defined or custom exceptions. That is nothing but writing our own exceptions. Let's begin. So far we have handled exceptions which are raised because of some code errors such as arithmetic exception, null pointer exception, number format exception, etc. Now we are going to create our own exceptions and we are going to handle that. So how to create user-defined or custom exceptions? So in order to create an exception class of our own, we need to extend exception class. So exception class, is actually the child class of the throwable class, and throwable class is super class of all exception classes. So by extending this exception class, you can create an exception, and that class is going to become a checked exception, because exception, throwable, IO exception, SQL exception, all are checked exceptions only. The runtime exceptions are unchecked exceptions. So now if at all you want to create unchecked exception, then we need to extend runtime exception class, because we know all runtime exceptions are unchecked exceptions, right? Usually when user creates an exception, we actually create by extending exception class, and our user exceptions are our own exceptions are going to be checked exceptions. When it is a checked exceptions, compiler asks for it, right? Compiler asks for it. So compiler asks us to either to keep that exception in try catch or declare that particular exception, right? So this is an example how we are going to create an exception. So class my exception extends exception, and I have my constructor my exception, and it takes an error description. We know error description, right? So error description for any exception we can actually get with the help of e.get message method, right? So whenever you say get message, you will actually get this error description. For example, it is arithmetic exception, then we will have divide by 0, something like this, right? So we will have divide by 0. So this is the error description. If it is number format exception, for input string colon whatever the input string. So each exception class has certain error description. So now I am creating my own exception, so I also need to define what is my error description, right? And I need to pass the string to my superclass constructor, right? What is my superclass? Exception is my superclass, and this error description I need to pass to my super. That's it. So now your exception class is ready. So creating user-defined exception is so easy. Just extend your exception class, okay? And let's have a constructor. Mention your error description as a string and pass the string to super. Pass the string to super. So super refers to immediate parent class constructor. So now super means it goes to immediate parent class constructor, and whenever exception object is thrown, this error description is going to get printed actually. Okay, so this is how we can actually create user-defined exception. It's an easy one. Now, once we create an user-defined exception, now we need to have the scenario, right? So where you can actually throw that particular exception. So now I'm going to explain two scenarios, but for one I will actually read the code. So I'm taking the first scenario as voting app. So in this voting app, what I'm going to do is I would like to validate the age. The age is less than 18. I'm going to throw my user-defined exception. Okay. If it is greater than or equal to 18, then welcome to vote. Otherwise, I will throw invalid age exception. So that exception I'm going to create. Now the second scenario I will create is for banking app. And in the banking app, whenever you are withdrawing the amount, your amount should be less than the balance, right? Then only withdrawal will happen. If the amount asked is greater than the balance, then we would like to throw insufficient funds exception, right? This is the scenario. So firstly, I need to create exception classes, and I have to use them in the scenarios, so like voting app or banking app. Fine. Yeah, let's now actually create the exception classes, and I have the code written already. I'm going to create invalid age exception, extends exception. So what is the exception? What kind of exception we're going to create? checked exception. Usually we create checked exception only. So public class invalid is exception, ends exception. Now I'm creating a constructor by taking the error string. This is my error description or error message. I'm passing that to my super. This is done. Now I have one more exception for my banking app. So this I'm going to use for my voting app. This I'm going to use for my voting app. And this, the second one, so class insufficient funds exception, extends exception. So this is also a checked exception, and this I'm going to use for my bank app. Okay, so that much simple actually, right? Let's have exception class, extend the exception, then write the constructor and pass your error string in the super. Right, so now keep it ready. So that means your dot class files, you have to make it ready. Now, yeah, so let me actually show you that Java C invalid is exception.java. When I compile now, okay, so actually I have one error here. So this comment was not properly given. Let me now compile again. Yeah, this time compile. Now, if you see how many dot class files you will get, 2 dot class files, right? Invalid age.exception.class and insufficient funds exception.class, right? Because this source file has got 2 classes and dot class files are ready. And these exception classes can be used in any scenario. Now I am making up a scenario for my voting app. I'm making up a scenario for voting app actually. So what is there in the voting app? Let's see. So public class voting app. And now here I have a method called validate. Okay, in the voting app, somebody will come for vote actually. So when they come, I need to validate them, right? So for that, I am writing a method called validate. So I am making it static so that I don't require any object to be created. Later, I will create object also, don't worry. So public class voting app, static void validate, it takes an integer and validates it. So if age is less than 18, what I'm saying, throw. So explicitly I'm using, see, throw so far we have not used actually. Now here I'm using throw explicitly. So whenever you have your user defined exceptions created and you want to throw, then throw has to be used explicitly. So now I am saying throw new invalid age exception. Why I am explicitly throwing? Because age is less than 18. Now there is no exception which is defined in Java API. Arithmetic exception is there, number format is there, null is there, array index is there, but you don't have any kind of exception if age is less than 18. So this is my requirement for my particular application. So I have created my exception class and I'm using it whenever age is less than 8. So I'm throwing it, throw new invalid age exception, and this is the error message. This is the error message I am passing. Right, so here I am taking the string error string. So this is the error message I am passing, that I am saying underage or invalid age, whatever it is. So you can actually have that. And else, now you can say system.out.println welcome to vote. So age is not less than 18, definitely greater than or equal to 18. So then what happens? Welcome to vote. Right, so this is my method. Now I would like to use this method in my main actually. So I'm saying validate of 23. So actually the age is greater than 18 over here. So that means I should get welcome to vote. And here I need to, so age is less than, let's say now here 16. When it is 16, age is less than 18. So here the exception must be thrown. Right, here the exception must be thrown. Okay, so now this much I have written, but is it a valid program? Is it a valid program? Anything else we have to do? So many things we have to do. So first of all, let's ask the compiler to compile it. Let's ask the compiler to compile it and let's see what all it says. So we will figure out the things actually. Let's understand from the compiler report. So voting app.java. Now let's say here, first of all, it's saying unreported exception, invalid age exception must be caught or declared to be thrown. So why it is saying actually? Because the exception is invalid age exception is a checked exception, right? It's a checked exception. So whenever you have a checked exception, compiler finds it, right? So whenever you are using or whenever you have the capability, you need to declare it. you need to declare it. So here in this method validate, you are throwing an exception. That means what? You have the capability of raising an exception. So then you should tell everybody that I have the capability of throwing an exception. So let's declare it. So how to declare? We understood now with the throws keyword, right? So throws invalid is exception. Invalid is exception, right? So now that error will go off. Now let's see Java C voting up.java, and that error goes off now because we have declared it. So compiler says either you catch it, try catch, otherwise you declare it, declare to be thrown. Okay. So now what is the problem actually? So here the problem solved. But what about here? Validate 23, validate 16. See, you know, there is a method which is actually throwing an exception and you are calling it. You are calling it, right? So now you should be careful. That's what we have seen in readline method. Readline throws exceptions. Whenever I'm using it, I'm catching it. I'm putting that in try catch. So here also what I need to do is, because these methods may throw some exception, these methods are throwing an exception, that is clear actually, right? Whenever age is less than 16, so I need to actually put them in try catch. Okay, so even it is not 16, so this declares invalid is exception. So whenever I use it, I must handle that. I must handle that whatever the value that you are passing, because it is declares it. So as a caller, you have to take care of it. So catch, I can actually say exception over here, exception E, because I can actually refer through my parent reference variable because of the inheritance. Where invalid is exception is extending exception class. Exception is our parent class now. Parents can refer to child objects, and here we can actually print that particular exception object, whatever it is, right? Yeah. So here I don't have any resources. Here I don't have any resources. So I am not actually using finally. So if at all you want to use finally, then let's say finally block and just say finally always gets executed. Finally always gets executed. Usually it is used to close the resources, but I don't have any resources over here. Finally always gets executed. So this is a statement I am printing. So now I have everything, right? So I have try, I have catch, and I have finally 3 blocks, and I have throws, and I have throw also. All I am using, all the 5 keywords we are using actually in the scenario which I am using user-defined exceptions. So all the 5 keywords of exception handling are used over here because I have invalid is exception which is user-defined, my own exception, so I need to explicitly throw it. Since this method has the capability, then I have to declare it. So I want to use this validate method here in my main method. So I should keep them in try catch. And I want to make my finally to be executed. Some code I would like to write. So finally I can write. If resources are there, definitely you need to write. Okay. So here I can actually make the resource also because this age I am taking directly, right? So I can read this age from the user using buffer reader. So then buffer reader will be there and I can close it. Right, so we can actually make that also. But now let's see what is going to happen. So since I have handled it, so then compiler is happy because try catch is there, it will compile. Yeah, it compiled it. So now let me run actually. So Java voting app, and then first time what happens? So we are actually passing what? Validate 23. So it goes there, and age less than 18, no. So welcome to vote. And then next call is actually validate 16. So 16 is less than 18. So it throws new invalid exception, right? This method throws, and of course that method was called in try catch. So it comes to the catch, and we are printing what is the problem. So what is the problem? Invalid is exception under age. So I'm not seeing java.lang or java.io because it's not there in any package, right? If I wish, I can put them in some package over here. I can put them in some package like exceptions package. So now it will throw me like exceptions dot invalid is exception, something like that, right? And since I'm using finally, finally always gets executed. So if at all you want to write rest of the code. So the rest of the code also is going to get executed because you have handled it, right? So this is what rest of the code. Rest of the code follows. So now it's working fine, right? Yeah. So now what I do is, since I have taken a static method, so I am calling directly like this. So I want to make this is non-static, right? Just let's say this is just void validate or public void validate, whatever it is. So then I cannot use actually validate straight away. So what I require here, you require to create objects. This is what object-oriented program is about, right? So voting app, and I need to create an object here. Voting app view1 equal to new vote. So let's say new voting app, and so I can create one more. So otherwise only one object, and I can call actually here v1 dot validate of 23 and v1 dot valid of 16 actually. Okay, otherwise you want to create one more vote actually, v2 and v2 dot validate, whatever it is. Fine. So whenever you have non-static method, you require an object. Fine. Yeah. So let me actually compile this. Java C voting up dot Java. It will get compiled. It's taking some time. Otherwise, everything is fine. So we have the object. We are calling the methods. Yeah, it's done. And when I say Java space voting app, now you can see the same work is happening. So welcome to vote. And for 16, it throws invalid as exception. And then I'm catching it and printing. And then finally always gets executed, and rest of the code follows since we have handled it. So this is how we can actually create exception classes and we can use them. So here invalid as exception I am using in voting app. So now here insufficient funds exception we can actually using in banking app. So what you need to do in banking app, let's have a public class banking app, and let's have a variable called balance, and set the balance, write a constructor to set the balance, and then write withdraw method. The withdraw method takes the amount, whenever amount is greater than balance, throw insufficient funds exception. Otherwise, update the balance and say withdraw is success. Then here create one banking app b1 equal to new banking app and call the methods. Okay, one is actually withdrawing successfully, another is actually throwing insufficient funds exception. That's it. So whenever you write that method, you have to declare an exception, and whenever you are calling that method, you have to catch that exception, right? Yeah. So this is about working with user defined or custom exceptions. Hope you understand. And in the next session, we are going to discuss about try with the resources. Thank you.